Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Diane Kujubu Belly, and I grew up on Walsh Avenue. And every single house on my block was Japanese American except two. And I thought that was normal at the time. But it was a very different time back then. We all lined up at elementary school to get our polio vaccines. Okay? So you're nodding your head. And then a few years later, we lined up at school to get the vaccine, but in a sugar cube. Okay. And then in high school and college, there was the Vietnam War, desegregation, Woodstock, there were protests. But in all of this time, a lot of us were going to Japanese school or J school on Saturdays. Most of the boys, I think, went to J school on Saturdays because they didn't want to help their dads on their gardening route. And we joined JA Scout troops and JA sports teams. In fact, my husband, Joe Belly, when he was a kid, took judo over at the Venice Japanese Community Center, and he said that every single vehicle in the parking lot was a gardener's truck. Most of you in the room had parents and grandparents who went to camp during World War II. My dad took his family to Utah before the evacuation order came through, and my mom was in Hiroshima during the bombing. And I know other families who went to New Jersey under the protection of, or with the help of the Quakers. But all of this was very harsh, and all of this was something that they did not plan for. And all of this led to generational trauma and the way that they raised all of us. I met Ben in Mrs. Little's 7th grade geography class at Venice High School. Mrs. Little's 7th grade geography class at Marina Del Rey Junior High School. And I ran against Stephen for student body historian at Marina Del Rey. He won, I lost. I want to thank all the community and corporate sponsors, including Cato, and our CEO for Cato, Beverly Ito, is here today. Beverly, raise your hand. Okay. Beverly's husband, Chris Takoka, went to Venice High School. He played B football. I want to thank the Temple's Cato Grants Program, the VJCC Senior Wellness Program, and the Donut Man, Jim Nakano. Jim. I also want to thank all the personal sponsors and the donors. One of the first personal sponsors was Danny Nakagiri, who played B football at Venice High School and married varsity cheerleader Nancy Eno. Sadly, Danny passed away in March, but he was one of the first personal sponsors, which goes to show you how much he thought this event would mean to all of you and to our community. So thank you to all the supporters. This donation, this event was free, but because of the book sales and the sponsorships and the donations, we're able to make a donation to the Japanese American Memorial Monument, which marks the location where families had to board buses to go to Manzanar. I want to thank the scouts from Troop 764, the Boy Scout troop, who supervised the parking across the street at VJCC. Both Ben and Stephen were members of 764. I want to thank Reverend Corey Kwan, who's the resident minister here, and John Ito, who's our temple president this year. Thank you. John also grew up on Walsh Avenue, but he was at the other end of the street, near Alla Road, near the farms. And a huge thank you to the planning committee here at the temple. They've worked tirelessly to bring this day about, so thank you. Thank you. I think most of you have books. I think there's only a handful of books left for sale if you haven't purchased one already. So just to let you know, just a handful left. When you checked in, you received an evaluation form, because much of the funding for this event came through Cato, through their grant program. So it's really important for BJCC Senior Wellness Program and for the Temple program to be able to submit the evaluation results when we do our year-end reports. So Gail Hirami, you want to say just a couple words? Come. Gail is the director of BJCC Senior Wellness Program.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming today. If I haven't met you, my name is Gail Hirami and I am the coordinator for the Senior Wellness Program at the Venice Japanese Community Center. Thank you to Cato for their support for our program, as well as the program at the Venice Temple here. We're able to sponsor some of this cost of this event. So thank you. We appreciate if you could fill out the yellow surveys and bring them one before you leave. Thank you.
I wanted to introduce Gail because she's going to be wandering around with a basket or a box or a bag at the end of the event and collecting your evaluation form, so look for her. I want to introduce some very special guests who are able to join us today. Ben Masaoka's 2 children, 3 were supposed to be here, but Akira has an ear infection. So up until even last night, he was planning to be here. So I wanted to introduce Grace and Zara, who came down from the Seattle area, and they're going to come up and say a few words.
I've never had a mic before. So. Hi everybody, I'm Zara and this is my sister Grace, and I want to first say that my brother Aki and our mom Ada also send their heartfelt thanks along with us, and they both really wish that they could be here. And us as a family, we're so deeply grateful, not only to Stephen and Diane for all of their work in sort of springing this event forward, but to all of the sponsors, to all of you community members who are coming to support. It means so much to us. It would mean so much to our dad as well. You know, something when you lose a loved one, it can feel like the world kind of keeps moving. I didn't want to get emotional, but I knew this was going to happen. It can feel like the world kind of keeps moving and your world has stopped a little bit. But this really gave us an opportunity to slow down again and feel like the community has sort of taken a pause with us, and we all can think about our dad and kind of bring him back into the present and celebrate him and celebrate his work. Writing was one of his greatest passions. And for so much of our life, you know, he was in the office writing hours and hours a day, and we never knew what he was writing about. He was pretty reluctant to share, but that was one of the ways that he got to process, I think, was through his own personal writing. And, you know, we would ask a lot about his childhood. We knew that there was a lot of history, a lot of pain. And a lot of times, I was telling Stephen earlier, you know, I'd ask him and he'd kind of just grunt and like walk away. And I hear that's not very uncommon as far as responses go, but you know, this book has become a way for us to learn about some of those things we wanted to know about. It's become a way for him to have a space to tell his story and to feel seen, and for us to learn about him. And I also hope for you all and for other Japanese Americans, especially Sansei, to be able to feel a connection and feel also maybe that you feel seen and understood. And I think that's it. I'm going to keep it short and sweet, but I again just want to say thank you so much. If you were a sponsor, we have cards for all of you guys, so please come find us. If not, we'll give them over to someone who can find you, and I'm just going to pass it over to Grace for a brief thank you.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to Zara, but again, our dad's book is technically labeled as fiction, and it is, and it also is not. And those of you who may have read it already and may have shared childhood experiences with our dad will know that, and if you can relate to that. And so, yeah, we definitely learned a lot more about him, and hopefully you can too. And again, we just appreciate you just being here so much. It means the world to us. Thank you.
you, thank you. We have another special guest. You're all special. You're all special. But another special guest joining us today is Pat Lennon. Pat was one of Ben's best friends from Venice High School all the way through the end of Ben's life. Pat and his brother and 2 cousins make up the band Venice, which has toured around the world. In fact, they won the equivalent of the Grammy Award in the Netherlands. And if his name is familiar, it's because he's one of the younger brothers of the very famous Lennon sisters of Lawrence Welk fame. But even more important, he was voted best looking boy of the senior class at Venice High School. And you can see his picture in the yearbook. So Pat has a few words to share with us.
Hello, my name is Pat Lennon, and I was born and raised in Venice Beach, California. My huge Lennon family has been there since 1917. I started at Venice High in 1967, and I think I first met Ben in a class run by a Mrs. Koch. She had one of those foot-high sweeping bouffant hairdos on top, and on top of her head, and the glasses with the piqued glass with the string strap around it. So being kids, Ben and I kind of laughed after class, and I think that's the first time we actually talked. We bonded over so many things: surfing, literature, music, nature, and humor. We would laugh at and with each other our whole relationship. We had such a great core group of surfers: Robert Sarita, Malcolm Carr, Jack Cano, and many more. Ben would always say he was a better surfer than I. I would say I was better, and I think I was right. We would surf from San Diego to Santa Barbara. Ben's older brother George was president of Menehune Kekai, which was a surf club in West LA. And they had some great surfers, some infamous surfers. Ben and I were 16 years old when MKK, the surf club, would have these raging surf parties at the Masaoka house, which kind of stood by itself along Bologna Creek, if you all know. And surfers from Hawaii and Southern and Northern California would attend, and there were hundreds of people. George wouldn't want us to be there because we were little punks. But Ben and I would sneak in after about 2 kegs. They would have 2 kegs. And those parties were great. And I remember the dad would always be sitting in the house. Ben and George's dad would sit in the house like, I think they're having a good time. Early in our friendship, we realized we both loved to read. Ben turned me on to J.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Well, it trickled down to my whole family. And we all loved it so much, we had an annual party on September 22nd, which was the birthday of one of the main characters, Bilbo. We would all dress as characters, and Ben would come every year, and we thought we were such nerds, and we loved it. We didn't care. We also loved the beat poets, Ben and I did, and that generation of authors like Jack Kerouac, all of them. We just inhaled some of the classic American authors like Hemingway, especially John Steinbeck. We also loved Charles Bukowski. Ben turned me on to him. He was an author who wrote about the boozy, seedy, dark side of the Skid Row-y side of life. When I was 19, I worked on the Santa Monica Pier at a really cool greasy spoon called Al's Kitchen. It was a restaurant. My surfing friends and I were cooks and waiters, and most people working there were eclectic artists in some way. One of the waitresses was an older woman named Frances, who was a good friend. One day she was talking to a customer at the counter, and I looked at him and I go, oh my God, that's Charles Bukowski. So Frances came over and I told her, I said, that's Charles Bukowski, and she said, he's my ex-husband. And I have a daughter with him, Marina, and she ended up giving me a poem. Charles Bukowski was really seedy, but he wrote the most beautiful poem to his daughter. I think it's called Poem for Marina, and it's actually, you can find it online. So that night I called Ben, and he just couldn't believe it. He was really jealous. Our musical tastes were the same. From folk to psychedelic rock, we absorbed it. From Joni Mitchell and Crosby, Stills and Nash, to Jefferson Airplane, Cream, Jimi Hendrix. Ben bought an old step van, kind of an old like monk truck, and converted it into a camper. He had a really cool hip girlfriend. She was a hippie, as we all were, named Bev. And they both had dulcimers, which is a kind of 4-string lap guitar instrument. I would bring my guitar, and we would sit in the parking lot at Bay Street, sit in the back of the van with incense and candles and red wine. You can imagine what else. And we would make our own music, and that was truly a magical time. We also loved to hike and backpack. We'd go to the Malibu Canyons, to Santa Barbara Mountains, hot springs in the desert. But, and it's a big but, we both got poisoned out really badly. For 1 to 10 being worst, I would usually get about a 6, and Ben would always get a 10. I remember one hot summer night, Ben showing up at my house with shoes and pants and black turtleneck. It was like 80 degrees out, covering every part of his body because he had it covered poison up. We would then tickle him and make him itch and he'd get so pissed. I am a musician-singer, and I happened to be on a huge rock and roll tour from 2010 to 2014. And we visited Seattle twice in that time. I invited Ben both times to come to the concert. He bowed out the first time and got as far as the parking lot the second time, and then he turned around because there were too many people. I thought that was kind of like that. I was bummed, but I totally understand. At least I got to see him and Ada and his house and briefly got to meet the kids. When Ben got sick, he told me about it, and we became very close again towards the end of his life. He told me he was writing and sent me a copy of the Chicago Quarterly Review. I loved his work. Then he sent me a manuscript of his novel, Criminals. At this point, I have to mention my sisters were famous TV personalities. They were the Lennon sisters on the Lawrence Welk show. Yeah. So I'm reading the manuscript, and Ben writes about this. I'm reading it in the book. Reading about being around 14 years old and walking into his living room and his dad is watching his TV and the Lennon sisters on the Lawrence Welk show. It's in the book. It's so cool. I felt so honored he would mention my family in his book. My family loved him. My dad called him Ben Dover. Dumb humor, but we laughed every time. When Ben passed away, he wanted me to put some of his ashes in the Pacific Ocean, where we had spent so much time. Ada asked me, and of course I was honored again. I made a small video of me dropping his ashes and talking about Ben on the coast and how much it meant to him. I was so touched emotionally that Ada called me and said she and the kids really loved it. So I've spent the last few nights thinking of what I would write. It was so emotional, so cathartic. It made me see Ben again as he was, smart, way funny, loving, and such a good friend. So I thank Ada, Ben's children, Zara, Grace, and Nikita, and Steve Okazaki for inviting me to speak of Ben. I loved him. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
And if you want your picture taken with the best looking guy at Venice High School, I'm sure Pat would accommodate that. He said he'd be happy to. And finally, I'm so pleased to introduce Stephen Okazaki. By now you know that he's been nominated for 4 Academy Awards, winning an Oscar for the documentary short subject Days of Waiting, The Life and Art of Estelle Ishigo. So, Stephen.
Thanks so much. It's amazing to see everybody here. My 4 sisters, Diane, Susan, Janice, and Hannah, stayed in LA, and I've moved to the Bay Area, and I've come here all the time for holidays and work and various things, and not come to markets or various places here. And I would always wonder why I never run into anybody, from junior high school or anything ever. And And then last year, my daughter Daisy graduated from Pitzer College, and she was going to stay in LA. And she was talking about missing going to dancing in laboratorios in the Bay Area. And we said, well, I'm sure they have lots of them in LA. And I sort of looked around, and I saw, well, they have something in LA. I mean, something in Venice at the Venice Community Center. It's called Summer Matsuri, and so I asked one of my sisters. I said, "Are you going to this Summer Matsuri?" And I think it was Janice or Susan. They said, "I don't know what that is. I'm not going." And then so we went, and I saw my sister there, and she said, "It's not the Summer Matsuri, it's the carnival." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." And so we're getting ready to, we're there, and Daisy asked to borrow my credit card. She said I wanted some udon, and I said, "Why don't you take some cash?" And she said, "No, they just take credit cards." And then so I gave her my credit card, and she she said, she gave it back to me, and she said, "Oh, I want to get some shave ice. Can I get your credit card back?" And I said, "Sure." And then she said, "I don't know. She said, I want to get a T-shirt or something, or a cap." And then anyway, so the dancing starts, and I'm standing on the sideline, of course, as usual, watching. And between dances, the announcer comes on and says, "Oh, next dance is this, and so you'll need a fan, and the next dance, no fan, you just need the kachi-kachi." And then the next break, she says, "Stephen Okazaki, come to the booth. Your credit card is here." And I went, "Ah!" And she's repeating it over and over. "Come to the booth, Stephen Okazaki, your credit card is here." And so I run to the booth because she keeps repeating my name, and I said, "Okay, I'm here. You have my credit card." And this Sansei woman says, "Oh, Stephen Okazaki." And she grabs it, she goes, "Stephen Okazaki, hometown boy has returned." And she goes, "I'm Diane Kujubu." And she gives me her credit card, and we're talking, and she mentions that she's read Criminals, Ben's book. And I said, "Really?" I said, "I've been really thinking about how we need to do something, some kind of book reading or something, for the book. It's Venice, and plays an important part of the book." And she says, "Yeah, I think so, and I know this person, I know this group, and we should do that." And then I go back to the Bay Area, and I don't know, it seemed like 3 days later, well, maybe it was a week, I get an email from Diane from Jubu, and she says, "Okay, I've got Kara Services involved. I've got these people on the committee, and let's have a Zoom call with like these 4 people." And there's this sudden energy in it, and and soon we're figuring this out, and she says, "That other day, the day previous to you were there on a Sunday, before that, Eddie Mashiro was at the meeting and at the carnival, and Karen Nakagiri was there." And I go, "You're kidding." And Eddie Mashiro, M, Karen, N. I sat right next to them because I'm O. And I hadn't seen them since junior high school, and you know, because high school was just everybody splitting out in different directions, and it was amazing to see them again. They were just as, you know, as wonderful people as they were then, and better, you know, just, and suddenly, you know, I just felt this incredible energy and excitement, and people, you know, I was talking to Diane about Ben, and suddenly there was this energy, and the committee, we started talking about it, and, you know, and then the committee grew, and we were trying to do it in different places, and suddenly, you know, 2 weeks ago, we were on a Zoom call, and there were, you know, I don't know, seemed like 20 people on the Zoom call, and it was overwhelming, and here we are, and you know, Ben, you know, I knew, you know, was among many of his friends, you know, growing up. We were in the Boy Scouts together, and you know, we saw, you know, we played together as kids, and I don't know, I feel like every time was sort of memorable. You know, we once went out, I don't know if it was a couple of us, I don't know if Fred Takano was there, and we went out looking for, trying to catch lizards once with his BB gun, and lifted up among the remains of the farms in the area. We lifted up a plank of wood once, and a big black rat was right there. And, I think one of us shot the rat with the BB gun, and it just went, and then just went in, and barely phased it. But we, Ben knew those farms. I mean, had explored them. I clearly spent lots of his time just running up and down that area, all that undeveloped area that was, you know, that became Marina del Rey, and he brought back a bag full of live lizards, and he had a little room separate from the house that had a boa constrictor, and he threw them in the cage with boa constrictor, and we just like stood there and were, it just gobbled one up, and then he said it'll just save them up, and it basically had its meal for the rest of the year. And I remember walking home thinking, wow, I wish I was Ben. And, you know, we lived on that Bologna Creek, you know, was that totally different kind of area than our sort of flat area. You know, our house was on Admiral and McConnell with the big lawns and stuff. And I hated mowing. And Ben had this sort of, you know, I don't know, this sort of hang loose kind of sense of adventure. And, you know, once we were in the Scouts, on a snow trip, I don't know if it's Mammoth or Mount Baldy that we seemed to go to all the time, and they had, people were tobogganing off these really 3-foot things, and I just thought, well, this is really boring, so I convinced him and this other kid to look for something more challenging, and we went off and found this ridiculously steep slope, which is basically just the side of the hill with a covered over street, highway road, and got on it, and we were just plunging like super fast on a toboggan with me in the middle with Ben and back, and I think the kid was named Steve Shintani or Shintaku, or anyway, he was small. And the thing about Ben is he was always up for adventure, but he was smart as opposed to me. I was always up for adventure and was not as smart. And so I was hanging on to the toboggan and we just going screaming because we were not going to die. I could see there's a large pine tree up ahead, and we were going, and Ben jumped off the back. And Steve and I just went screaming and went right towards it. And I woke up a couple seconds later, and Ben came running up, asked me if I was okay, and he was laughing, and I started laughing, and I looked at those little red things on the ground, and I said, "Whose teeth are those?" And then I realized they were mine. And then we looked at Steve, and he was crying, and we saw that two teeth mark on the top of his head. And I can't remember anything being born with Ben, really. And I can't remember really hanging out with Ben in high school because people were so preoccupied. I mean, it was Venice High School. I don't know, it was kind of, I felt very alienated during most of it. I didn't really hang out with friends from the community much. And just by happenstance, I happened to be with Ben, though the night his mom died, and that was really the last time I saw him for years. And then he connected with me just on a stopover in Berkeley, where I live. And I saw him for a couple hours, and then I didn't hear from him again until about a really long time, almost just maybe 10 years ago. He had done work before he became a teacher in the Seattle schools, teaching high school English. He had done work with, I don't know if it's the city or the state, doing work helping heroin addicts in rehab work. And he had seen a film I made called Black Tar Heroin, and at the end of the film, he saw my name, and so he, sometime later, reached out to me and sent me an email and asked if I could send him a DVD of it, and I was like, wow, Ben, I loved Ben. He was like one of my favorite people, and then he retired, I think 7-8 years ago, from Seattle schools, and he started writing, and he asked me if I wanted to look at some of the stuff, and it was about this period in his life, and he was kind of this in-between period before he settled in Seattle. I was really kind of amazed by it, and then he started writing this book and sort of sharing stuff and asking me notes just about what I felt like he was very focused on his experience and his point of view, and I just felt like he had astounding memory, like for him as a kid, and he could it seemed to me like he could just go back and he remembered how the street felt on his bare feet, like he could smell it and be there. It really seemed like he could just go back in time and he could just walk the streets, and I feel it in the book, and just remarkable memory, even though it seemed like in life he had completely divorced himself from his youth here and rarely came back. I mean, since in the last 30 or more years of his life, he didn't really come back here. But it clearly, when you read the book, it was clearly in his heart and was there and could be recalled. And but it seemed to me that he wasn't paying attention so much to the adults that when he was a kid, that he didn't care about them. So he'd say, "Do you remember these adults?" And so I was watching the adults when I was a kid because I was concerned. I thought they were you should watch them, because they were the ones who were going to trip you up. And so that was my focus. So I would say, yeah, this is, and he would never like take my suggestions that much, but he would kind of turn them into something else. And like once I was really inspired. He said, you had some names, and I thought, these names that you have suck. And so I gave him a whole list of what I thought were great names, of Nisei names, like nicknames. And I said, here are my favorites. And I said, people I knew, and I said, this is my favorite, Bacon, like it's a great Nisei name. And here's another, it's like Socks, that's a great, and then he didn't use any of them. Like the closest he got, I saw in the characters, which I thought was connected to Bacon. He named one of the characters Cheddar, and I thought, that's not a Nisei name. But it's a Ben kind of Nisei name. It's like, it's not. It's his kind of artistry. It's like you wouldn't want to just take somebody else's idea. Then it would be like Stephen's idea of a good name. It's like you'd have to create something of his own. I think that, and that's what you find throughout the book. You just take something from memory. Oh, this happened. Everything is interpreted in the book. So it is, like Grace and Zara were saying, it is deeply personal, but it's also deeply imaginative. And, it's just, before this, I started, I read it again, and, initially I was just kind of, the first reading I was just shocked and so touched, and, I was talking, and my daughter Daisy would ask me about it, and she asked me about it when he was writing the book, and I was just, she started asking me questions about, the community and stuff, and things I'd never thought of while I was reading the book, just never give a thought of. And that's what the power of the book was for me, and the experience of, when he was writing it, I just thought, somebody's thinking about these things that, I and probably most Sanseis just like had buried, because you just they were too painful or complex to think about. And maybe they were for him, but he just decided to bring them out because they were there and start working them, and they became this story. And so, I have to, a lot of it really woke something up in me, and I thank my daughter, because she's been thinking about, as a Yonsei, what does it mean, what is community, what does being Japanese American mean to her? And we've been talking a lot over the last many years, and just the feedback I've gotten from her, and just when she's posed a question to me, I just I haven't had a quick answer. It's made me think, and so I've asked her to be the sort of first reader for a piece opening the book. So this is my daughter Daisy, and she's going to start it off. Is that too big a build-up?
No.
Alright, well, hi everyone. I'm Daisy, and I'm just so happy to be here. It's really an honor to be reading a passage, with family and friends and community, and just really overjoyed to be here today. I didn't write anything, so I hope that's okay. But yeah, I love this book. I never met Ben, but reading this book was really touching, and it just felt like such a beautiful portrait of my family who grew up in Venice, and of my dad, and it was really an emotional experience for me, and I feel very connected to the book and to Ben as well, even though I've never had the opportunity to meet him. This book, it's such, as everyone has been saying, just an honest and beautiful portrait of time period and of childhood and adolescence in this way that is just so expansive, and I think also has this really sort of emotional sort of touch of darkness and pain, that it doesn't feel it's very subtle and it's very beautifully done, and I think is reflective of a community that had just experienced this complete upheaval, this act of violence that was internment. And I think when we talk about internment, we think about what happened in the camps and what happened to Venice and Issei. But we have a whole generation of people who grew up with parents who experienced this great trauma, and a whole generation of people who had to rebuild their lives after the camps. And that's, I think, something that we don't really talk about, is what happened to our communities afterwards, and what happened to the children who were raised by people who experienced this violence and this upheaval. And I think a lot of those stories are sort of lost to us in a lot of ways, because it's just not something we talk about. And so I was really struck by that feeling in Ben's book, this feeling of sort of there's a depth and sort of a sense of loss that I feel is present here that is really touching. And I think that is really present in this passage that I'm going to read, which is in chapter 2. So I'll just go ahead and read. This is chapter 2. That summer, a feral cat appears in their yard. The cat is gray with dark stripes, white paws, and white at the tip of its tail. They see it by the woodpile one afternoon. It's hunting lizards, Ruth whispers. They approach slowly. The cat freezes, stares, and then turns and slips away. They see it again in the field, stopping once to turn and look back before darting behind tall weeds. The next day, they see the cat lurking around the garbage cans. Here, kitty, kitty. They squat down and pretend they have food, rubbing their fingers together. But the cat is wild and independent, with fierce, narrow eyes. Here, kitty, kitty, Hank says, moving closer. Again, the cat disappears. Later that summer, they play in the backyard when Alice is napping. A faint mewing comes from the fields. They find the cat in a little den of bushes, lying in the dirt, with kittens crying and suckling. The cat is startled and half rises as if to run away, but the children stay at a distance and talk with soothing voices, and they lays back down, watching them warily. They go to the house and return with a piece of bologna. They toss it to the cat, who tenses, then sniffs it. She quickly stands and eats as the mewing kittens fall to the side. There's a can of tuna fish in the pantry, and they bring that to the hungry cat as well. This time, the cat lets them come a little closer. Ruth knows what their father will say. I work to feed us, not the cat. The next day, when their mother is napping, she tells Hank, follow me. It is early afternoon. She leads him to the creek where they scoop down the embankment. It is low tide, and islands of sand form in the long pools of water. Mud hens float and swim away at the sight of the children, but not far, and continue feeding, dipping themselves upside down among the water weeds for worms and bugs in the muck. Ruth has crackers she put in her pocket during lunch and shows them to Hank. He wonders what she's thinking. She searches along the shore for the right-sized rock. Ruth is skillful with rocks and likes finding heavy boulders to lift and toss in the water to splash like bombs. She finds a large flat rock and carries it to the water's edge. In bed last night, she imagined everything she will do, even the exact order of doing it. Summoning the mud hens, lifting the rock and when to throw. Here, muddy, muddy, she chants, tossing cracker crumbs in the water at her feet. She's fed them before. The birds paddle over and crowd together, grunting and darting forward. Ruth lifts the rock and holds it over her head, and then she curls it downward. Two of the birds get away, but not the one in the middle. The bird floats in the water without moving. Ruth finds a stick and pulls the dead bird to the bank. They examine the dull, dark feathers and black, scaly feet. Ruth holds the bird upside down by its skinny legs and climbs the embankment. Hank follows behind, watching the bird's head wag loosely from side to side. In the field, they slowly approach, the mother cat and her litter. Not coming too close, Ruth gently tosses the dead bird to where the cat lies watching them. It sniffs, then leaps up, scattering the kittens, and pounces on the bird. The cat tears into the breast and growls as it eats. Later that day, they return to see a gaping, bloody hole in the body of the mud hen. The mother cat is nursing the kittens and appears less afraid, twisting her head on the ground and gazing up at them. The next day, there are two boys in the field, standing several feet apart, playing catch with something. "Get a rock," Ruth says. She runs and Hank follows. The boys are older, junior high age, tossing a kitten to each other and laughing. The mother cat races back and forth, looking upward to follow the kitten as it is tossed through the air. "Stop it! Stop it!" The boys turn around at Ruth's voice. They stand waiting. The boy holding the kitten drops it to the ground. He raises his foot as if to stomp on the kitten, then lowers his foot and both boys laugh. Ruth flings her rock and hits the boy in the face. His hands fly up and he staggers back and falls. The other boy comes at them. Hank throws his rock, but it sails off to the side. It does not matter. Ruth attacks the boy. He is bigger, but she claws him in the eyes before he can grab her. She kicks his shins. Hank does too. They kick and punch him as fast as they can. The other boy climbs to his feet and they both run away. Will they come back? They better not. They count the kittens. They are safe. The next day they return to the field with a piece of fish Ruth knows that the mother cat will especially like. Can we keep a kitten? Hank wonders. We have to wait until they're older. And then we can each have one. They'll keep mice away. But the bushes and tumbleweeds have been stomped down, the nest wrecked. Among the trampled brush, someone has done to the kittens what Ruth has done to the mud hen. They are all dead, including the mother, crushed by rocks. Thank you.
Hello. I did helped organize one other book reading in the Bay Area with people in the audience, very small, for people, and none of the people that came knew Ben, but they were all interested in the book. So we wanted to, but Ben's cousin, Jan Masaoka, came and was one of the readers, and it was really great. She was a good, really read a great passage, and but it was really nice to hear something about growing up in the Masaoka clan, and she talked about getting together at their house over right on Bologna Creek, with the Masaokas, because the mother was not able to travel after a while, so they would all meet up there, and it was really nice. And so when I told Jan we wanted to try to do something here, she said, "Oh, you should get my brother Mark." And I thought, "Oh, thank God, yes." And but I also wondered if Mark, we didn't discuss this in advance, but I wondered, Mark, if you could talk a bit about, the Masaokas were, probably the most well-known, Japanese families after the war, and of course there was Mike. If you could just talk a little bit about that as well.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you again for all your work in helping to pull this together. I just also want to introduce one of our cousins, Jim Nagano, and his wife Miak. Yes, and he's also the donut man, of course, who was introduced. But yeah, I think it's important because I grew up, like Jan we grew up in Northern California, and so we mostly saw the family during family gatherings, and so I think, and then for those, his father Ike was severely injured during the war, so he had a 100% disability, and so his health was, he always had to watch his health, and of course Sue had MS, and we remember her when she was, when she could walk around, not really healthy, but she was, she was able to get around, and then when she was bedridden for the last few years of their life. So that was sort of one of the atmospheres of their house growing up, that was sort of a constant part of what that was like. But when we had gatherings, there were a lot of other JACL families would come, the Inagakis and others, and it would be kind of a rousing group, and we would frequently meet at Ben's house, at Ike's house. And I think it had an effect in that, the Masaoka family was pretty close, especially the 5 brothers. And, 5 of them had served in the war together. And they were very, that was part of the whole rationale. And so growing up, we heard a lot about the camps, and we heard a lot about the 442nd. But then later on, we found there were a lot of Sanseis whose parents never said anything about it. And they only learned about the concentration camps when they went to college and started taking Asian American Studies classes. But I think that the sort of camaraderie, the felt that the role that the brothers and the family had taken during the war, and they also felt they were also part of it at that time during the war, part of some real conflicts and struggles that were within the Japanese American community, as many of you know. I mean, there were those who really opposed the JACL. They called them dogs. There was a riot at Manzanar against the family, my father and our grandmother, because they were there representing the Masaoka family and a lot of the opposition against them. So there's a certain sense of that role. They were, I heard another uncle talk about the time they met with some of the war resistors in Hart Mountain. So I think that period of time was very important to the family, to that generation in particular, but to the Masaokas because of the role that they played during some of those conflicts. And they could remember some of those things. I would be hearing conversations, and they would talk about conversations as if it had happened yesterday, even though at that time it was 15 or 25 years afterwards. So I think it was so that was part of it. Just as a kid, I envied them because they had a Honda 50, they had a go-kart there, they had BB guns, none of which I had. So I really had a great time with those kind of things. And but because these were big family gatherings, I had a lot more contact and experience with their parents and the family, and with some, and of course with the older brothers too. I was expecting when I first got the book that I would see 3 brothers in the book, and I think of course he brought in a sister as a character, and I think that was necessary because if you're around young boys, you don't get very much meaningful conversation or emotional kind of conversation. So I think that was sort of forced on Ben to bring in a girl character so he could have some interesting emotional kind of dialogue. So I will begin by reading another section of the book. That basketball season begins. The coaches teach them rudimentary aspects of the game. They explain each position in a sentence or two and encourage the boys, but that's about all. They saw during football season that boys are generally either already good or already bad, and in the short run, no amount of coaching is going to change that. Hank tries as hard as he can, but quickly filters down into last string. The same last string football boys are with him again, and Hank imagines they will be friends. But the boys fear the other players will invent names for them. Slowpokes, Team Bench, Team Baka, and they remain distant from each other. To target an individual is cruel and unsportsmanlike, but the anonymity of a group would allow them to be ridiculed. The coaches send in bench warmers frequently. They get to play at least 5 or 6 minutes every game. Hank liked how the waxed floor gleams under the bright lights, how the ball slaps and echoes and makes the floor tremble, and how the shouting of spectators in the background as he takes to the court makes him feel that everything depends on him. Each week, a team letter written by one of the mothers is printed and distributed. There's always a column to celebrate players. The 3 kings take up most of the column, and then the other 2 first-string players. The rest are given space appropriate to their standings, and bench warmers are mentioned last with a general sentence for each. Lancelot Yamada tried hard. Lincoln Hashimoto got a rebound. Hank always looks for his name. Toward the end of the season, Ruth runs to him, waving the newsletter in her hand. She points to a sentence. Hank Tanizaki has improved his dribbling. Hank reads the words over and over, his lips moving silently. He hands the paper back to Ruth, saying nothing. He leaves the room. You're improving, Hank, Ruth follows behind. There is something about Ruth's face, how eager and kind it is, her smile of crooked teeth, her thick eyebrows raised in appreciation. Don't be stupid, he says. Ruth blinks and lowers her eyes. Hank watches her walk away, tall and skinny in her blue checkered dress, her mop of black hair growing back from Kazu's last haircut. Later, Hank tries to be friendly, but she avoids him.
And as someone with grew up with 4 sisters, I was really, taken with the portrayal of Ruth in the book, and I found it really remarkable. I don't know how Sansei women felt about it. I'd be interested to hear afterwards, and for Ben, someone who grew up with 2 brothers, to write that. When Ben would talk about those days in the community, when he was just reeling off the time, would go, back then, and he'd just go, I remember, Tito's Tacos, Johnny's Pastrami, and the girls, Shirley Minamoto and Nancy Kono, or Sandy Kono, and like that was just part of the imagery, and I think he would, and Shirley's name would come up all the time, and he would say, of course she didn't know I existed, and so I thought Shirley should be part of the program, and that, so to represent, so that, and so Shirley's going to be the 3rd reader.
Hello. Oh my God, I haven't spoken in front of this many people in years. Stephen, this was a very interesting, introspective, and revealing experience for me, so thank you. Stephen, with whom I lived a block away growing up, and whom I haven't seen in maybe 50 years. Yeah, it's been a long time. Anyway, Ben's book is amazing. He recreates the neighborhood, the period, and the Japanese-American Sansei experience so eloquently. Reading it, I was able to relive and revive old memories, both good and bad, growing up as a Japanese-American Sansei in West LA, Mar Vista, Venice area during the 50s and 60s. I remembered that I felt like I needed to hide myself to a certain extent and who I was, not to stand out, to not express myself, hide my Japanese-ness, except to other Japanese, of course. I eventually realized that this was exactly how my mom and dad lived their lives. As you mentioned, since getting out of camp, where they experienced total racism, persecution, unconstitutional incarceration, loss of property, and humiliation. Okay, I'm gonna cry. When they were released back into society again, I believe they just wanted to disappear and, like you said, rebuild their lives quietly. They did get to be their Japanese selves with our extended family, of course, and the Japanese community, the church, but we had no Caucasian friends. That was interesting. This point made me realize that I always felt less than and not accepted and not as good as. This also unearthed some under-the-radar truths that I did feel a level of racism and prejudice in my life that maybe I had not acknowledged before. And it revealed that I do disappear to a certain extent and live my life very quietly. And I'm going to read chapter 5, a little bit from chapter 5. They meet for lunch at a bench near the ceramic studio to see if the rumor about Miss Parker and Mr. Mendez is true. But all they learn is that Miss Parker leaves her room exactly 5 minutes after the lunch bell and walks briskly to disappear around a building by the parking lot. They wonder if they should follow, but decide not to. The days are cloudy with gray light, and boys roam in small noisy groups, sometimes stopping to visit. Ruth knows the boys who appear during lunch are not there for her. It is surely they swirl around, standing like a single creature with 3 or 4 nodding, bobbing heads, shoving their hands in their pockets and grinning, rocking back on their heels. They barely glance at Ruth, only now and then as if wondering why she is there. Ruth's hair is cut straight across her forehead and the rest falls limply to her shoulders. She wears plaid cotton dresses buttoned at the neck and brown shoes. Their eyes move over her without interest. She does not like how Shirley acts around boys. When it's just the two of them, they talk of serious things, their plans for the future, what they think about their families. One day Shirley reveals something so serious about her parents that she starts to cry. Ruth feels a direct contact with Shirley's mind, her soul. Everything they say is understood instantly by the other, as if the emotions of their lives are the same emotions. But how different and false Shirley is in the presence of boys. She giggles at everything they say, turning her face upward with a smile. When they leave, the way she yells, "See ya?" Her voice going up on the last note makes Ruth hate her. Yet, after the boys are gone far enough away not to hear, they begin a critique of each one. "Did you notice his Adam's apple? He looks like a turkey." "Whoever cut his hair should be arrested." "The one standing close to me, I think he forgot to shower after gym." "I wonder if he brushes his teeth." The other one tags along like a dog, a wiener dog. Then it is fun, and Ruth is ashamed she ever doubted her friend. Later, walking home from school, she recalls everything she and Shirley talked about, remembers the boys that stopped to chat, thinks of what she will say the next time in response. One day at the end of lunch, after the boys are gone, Shirley asks, "Why do you hunch over in front of boys?" "What do you mean?" "You hunch over like this." Shirley draws her shoulders over and sinks her head down and between them, and she straightens up and looks at Ruth in the eyes. "You look like Quasimodo. You should stop doing that." When she gets home, Ruth stands in front of the mirror and imitates what Shirley did. She finds Hank in the kitchen. "Do I hunch?" "What's that?" Ruth shows him. "Do I? I don't know. Did somebody say that?" Shirley said it. "How would I know? I don't look at you." The next time she sees boys coming to talk, she makes herself sit up straight, and Shirley gives her a look of approval. "Why do you put your finger in your face and drag it across your cheek to your mouth?" Hank asks her one night. "What are you talking about? Did you see it in a movie or something? Show me what you mean." He pantomimes a poor imitation of a gesture Ruth recognizes as one that Shirley does around boys. Ruth lets Shirley weave a small braid in her hair. At school, when they meet for lunch, she takes up her glasses and puts them in her purse. Once she catches herself saying to the boys, "See ya!" But there are times she can hardly bring herself to meet Shirley. She dreads how boys compare them. Ruth can see it in their eyes, how quickly they assess, their eyes flicking over her just once to capture her entirety. Like animals, knowing instantly what is good and not good to eat. That weekend, Ruth goes for a long, aimless walk along the dirt road by their house, walking in the direction of the ocean. The sky is overcast, a salt breeze against her face. She drags her hand along the chain link fence that wasn't there yet when she and Hank killed a mud hen to feed the mother cat. She remembers the two boys they fought, how she punched and kicked them and drove them away. Had she really done that? She stops to throw a rock, trucking it through the air to where it splashes in the water. When they were little, she and Hank used to throw rocks for what seemed like hours. She threw rocks farther than Hank until one day he far outdistanced her. Just like that. Ruth remembers the disbelief on his face as they tried again and again. After that, Hank let her throw first and tried to match the splashes her rocks made instead of beating her. It didn't seem special at the time, him doing that. It was the same as when they shared anything, a bag of cookies, a slice of cake, making sure the other got the same amount. There wasn't a reason for him to beat her just to prove he could. In those days, Hank wanted to be with her all the time. He followed her around, leaned against her, obeyed her commands, sought her approval, looked for her when they were apart. He didn't want to throw rocks further than her, even though he could, as if he caught up to her in a race but refused to leave her behind. She thinks of how they pass each other in silence now. Why did it happen? One day she realized it had been like that for a while. She doesn't know how other families are. She imagines normal families talk to each other. But how silent Hank is, she doesn't know why.
Thank you, three readers. You did a terrific job. I just took a couple pages and started to read and realized it's really hard to read well and to do it. I think since the redress movement began in the early '80s, the communities talked about the silence of the Nisei, and I think filmmakers and activists and writers, talked about telling the Nisei story and telling the Issei story, and I think I think there's still a lot of parts of that story that haven't been told, and in some ways that there's become a sort of generalized story of about the camps. But I think the thing that that Ben's book is made me realize is that the Sanseis have been silent too, that they haven't told their stories, and I think that there's a vital story there, at least in terms of knowing who we are and what our experience is, because I think in my work I've discovered that in terms of even the Nisei, that many people felt like the post-year wars years were more difficult than the time leading up to the camps and during the camps, that the hardship after the war of coming home and trying to start lives was more difficult than that time. And for many Nisei, they weren't actually in camp very long. I mean, my parents, my dad was only in for for about 8 months. He was eager to join the army, and so he was in there very briefly. My mother also left to work outside of the camps, and typically only, in many families, one of the children stayed to look after the Issei parents, and so many of the Nisei were not in camp that long. I mean, the very young ones and the older ones who took care of the Issei parents, and so, I think that, I think growing up, I think for me, many like me, you thought of the camp story as ancient history, when in fact, most of us were born 5 or 10 years after the end of the war, and when we were young in the 60s, it was just 20, 1965, it was just 20 years after the end of the war, and we were, whether we know it or not, our lives were being profoundly affected by the aftermath of the camps, and we just didn't know it. I think many of us didn't know it. I think many of us might say, well, we didn't experience any racism or prejudice because we lived in this sort of insular cocoon that our parents sort of set up. In many ways, kind of like that was a kind of a more civilized version of camp. A village where you played sports to distract yourself, and where you had to provide for yourself. You set up, you had your own grocery and your own pharmacy and your own bakeries, and where everyone sort of represented that they were of one unit, when people had a multitude of different experiences during the war, and where some people went to these camps, and and you didn't talk about other more difficult situations, and where other people went to Tule Lake and had it much harder, and in other camps people were called internees, and at Tule Lake they were prisoners, and some of the camps had had manageable number of guards. At Tule Lake they had thousands of guards, and people were punished much more severely, so the experiences were very different, but we didn't look at or talk about the more extremes, or didn't learn about it. And certainly, really during, there was an energy in the community, and our parents were really focused on sort of, I think, protecting us, and I don't know how much was protection or avoidance as well. We took trips, to, national parks and stuff, and sometimes we had to stay in motels and stuff, and I actually don't know the answer, but we always stayed in one chain called the Travel Lodge, and I don't know if it was why we always looked forward to it. They had a good pool, but I have a friend who was talking to me about, he was from Monterey, and his family went to, his father was a gardener, they emptied out the truck with all the tools and stuff, and they drove to Grand Canyon, he said, and they looked for a motel near the Grand Canyon, and he said they went to 5 and 6 motels, and that all said vacancy on them, and they said sorry, no vacancy at every single one of them. So they pulled off the road near the Grand Canyon, and we're going to sleep in the back of the truck. And a Native American came up to him and said, you know, don't sleep here, don't sleep in your truck. He said, you go up a ways and you'll see this motel, and it's run by a Native American, and you can sleep there. And you know, and so I don't know if you know, if there was a kind of code among people that so that we knew that my father knew where we were supposed to stay, that so we wouldn't know that there was prejudice against us. And we went on plenty of vacations. We were perfectly happy. Talking about Troop 764. 7 July 1964 is the month and year that that Lyndon Johnson passed the Civil Rights Law. I don't, you know, they didn't mention that at our Boy Scout troop, as far as I know. Even was that just a massive coincidence? A couple months before that, I had always wanted to be a Boy Scout, and I think two of us, I don't know if anyone in the room was with me, I can't remember, but I wanted to be a Boy Scout, and a troop, I don't know the number of it, that met near Venice High on Beethoven, said they would accept a couple Japanese Americans to their troop, and we went to the troop meeting, and there were no other people there except an older guy with that troop, a Caucasian, I don't know, scoutmaster or whatever. And he said, well, we're going to let you, give you a first trial. And my mother had gotten me a Boy Scout shirt, and he told us some Boy Scout, you know, I'll do my honor to be my best. And he said, well, let's try out the first merit badge in electricity. And there was some lesson about conductivity, and he brought out a car battery, and we learned, you know, the plus and minuses, and had something spinning. And afterwards he said, and now I want you to clean the car battery, and it had some corrosion on the points. And he brought out a bucket of water and a big sponge, and he splashed the water on the car battery, and he said, clean the car battery. And the water splashed on my uniform, and I think the two other scouts' battery uniforms, which was, you know, it was just water, I thought. And then, and I thought it was, you know, electricity was kind of cool. And I went home. My mom put my brand new scout t-shirt into the wash, and when it came out, it was in shreds. And so that was my welcome into the Boy Scouts. So it was not a welcome. And so when the 764 was starting, my mom was dubious. She said, I don't know if I want to pay for another Boy Scout uniform. So I actually had to convince her, or my dad probably helped. I don't remember. So, but you know, I had no awareness. I thought it was an accident. But now, as an adult, I think that wasn't an accident. You know, that was how. Those were one of those subtle things. Not subtle, actually, but that was a message. And you know, but as a kid, you don't think that's, you know, that's racism. But you know, when the Civil Rights Law was passed, it was 1964. You know, and this community was still isolated. I don't know. Does anyone have a thought? Like I think, I don't know if they announced it in school, but we thought that was just for African Americans. we didn't think it related to us. We probably thought, well, we had all our civil rights just like everyone else. Even though at that time, my father, we lived in this area because it was near Hughes Aircraft, and my father from childhood had a passion for airplanes. And you know, when Pearl Harbor happened, he wanted to join the Air Force, and they told him, no, you can't join the Air Force. He went the day after Pearl Harbor. They said, well, you're too short. Go to the Navy. And they went to the Navy. They said, we're full up. Go to the Army. They'll take anyone. And the Army is the Army. They told them straight. They said, we don't take jobs. And so my dad went to Santa Anita, then Heart Mountain. And at Heart Mountain, he was there was one group who volunteered immediately. And even there at Heart Mountain, there was an anti-draft movement, so it was unpopular actually to join the draft initially. But I think that there's, I don't know where to go off there. Anyway, the consciousness, I don't think that, Lyndon Johnson's anti-housing discrimination law was passed in 1968. And I don't think, no one mentioned how that would relate to us, Oh, back to my father. I mean, my father, we moved here because it was near Hughes Aircraft, and they were hiring hundreds of people, almost daily right after the war. And my dad was dying to work in the aircraft industry and couldn't understand why he was constantly being turned down. I don't know if he was naive or what. My dad would never speak or show self-pity. So it just didn't come up, so he worked in these really small shops along Jefferson Boulevard that did related work, and the shops often closed, and they worked at another small shop that makes small parts, and my Aunt Mary, she worked in these little grocery stores, one on Washington Boulevard, these small mom and pop grocery stores. And my mom, she mostly raised us, but she at night would make these tiny little ribbons that, she worked for some of the sewing businesses that were near Alla Road and stuff. And once, she had a huge pile of ribbons that she sewed, and I said, how much are you making for those? And she said, well, I get for this box, and there were about 300 in the box. And she said, for this box, I think I get $2.50 in there. So I said, well, that's like half a cent for every 20 or something. It just seemed unimaginable. Like it was worse than I got at Stern's Barbecue. But and then somewhere along, after, not immediately, but somewhere after the civil rights laws passed, and I don't know how conscious, because I never asked them, they never brought it up. Somewhere after, not immediately, after the civil rights laws were passed in 1964, my Aunt Mary O'Selling was working at Vaughn's, making union wages, when before she was just making, I don't know if she was even making, minimum wage. And my dad, for the first time, after 20 years after the end of the war, for the first time, had a union job, and for the first time, we had decent medical care. And all that time, once I remember, before that, I asked my mom if we were poor, and she got really pissed at me. No, we're not like poor people. And but I don't think ever anyone, ever thought of themselves as connected to the civil rights law. They just thought they were hardworking and they were slowly moving up. But I think, so we were, and it never dawned on me till recently, after I was reading the book, after talking to my daughter, this is just like, it never just even occurred to me, that this is what was happening then. And that's that kind of blindness, I mean, even though you're looking at the outside world, you're reading about the struggles, of other, ethnic groups in this country, you don't realize your own struggles of your own community and how real they were then, and how ignorant you were of what was happening and what your parents were going through, and how your own and how it shaped you. Someone who's not processing what's going on, someone who's perhaps trying to even escape it, and that's that's formative, and it's partially because like our parents, we just have this it's a Japanese cultural thing. Well, you're not supposed to, the worst thing a Japanese person's supposed to do, is complain, is tumonku. My mom would say the second thing would be to brag or show off. She would call them show-offs, but never, you just accept and move on. And there's a price to that, in that you don't examine, you don't examine who you are, and you don't quite learn who you are. You just keep moving on. And I think, for myself and some part of the community, you just kept moving on and you miss who you've become, and hopefully, it works out. But I think the pain of it is maybe you turn out okay, but you then see people who, your friends or your brothers and sisters who struggling with that. And maybe you miss in ways that you could help them more, because you're all just saying, come on, just be strong and keep moving forward, when maybe maybe you should have listened, maybe you should have said, tell me what's really going on. And you see these two characters in the book, and they're just on that path where you're not sharing anything, where you just don't know how. And I think that, is this pain that Ben has in these characters, and that, is Ben's sharing with us, that I found so powerful, and that this thing, and really, to me, represents part of this Sansei experience and this inheritance that we have. That now, it's like, we're that age where, if you haven't, we better reflect now, so, I think there's, I could go on, but, I'd love to hear, I was talking to Diane about this, and, the theme being growing up Sansei, and how, I didn't want to, I think there's plenty of time, afterwards, and to get nostalgic and stuff, and I really wanted to not get nostalgic, but just talk about these things, and, things that maybe the book's bring up, or this just being here, seeing each other brings up, or, and if any thoughts you have, anything you want to share, I don't know. Yes?
Well, when I first met you, I looked at you and I thought, this Benji, mischief. That's my description of you. But I give speeches at, I'm a Rotarian, at different clubs and all that. but I see a lot of Japanese here. 1942, we were called the Blacks of the West. 10 years later, I think it was Time Magazine called us the ideal minority. So we deserve it now.
But to me, I mean, there's a lot of, we had the model minority thing was a lot of pressure. It's hard to be that model minority, or you just knew you weren't. I mean, our parents gave us this thing like achievement and humility, but I think that works up to a point, and in some ways, I think that was what was turned against them, and didn't really quite work for them. What, just merit, does that really work? Does that work now? Did that work then?
They actually brought that up in the book about the model minority myth. And it was compared between Ruth and her, thank you, Mike, and her brother, Hank. And I felt, after I read the book, I had a real strong emotional feeling about it. Because, one, I'm an emotional person to begin with. But second of all, is because, and I talked with my husband about this, throughout the entire book, who represents the protagonist and the antagonist of this book? And I know, in my mind, I felt like the characters in the books, they showed it through their action. And to me, I felt that Ruth was the protagonist, through her actions. She did a beautiful job about showing what it means to be a Japanese American. And if you get anything from the book, I think for each of you, you will take a different message away. Because the characters in the books are so portrayed so well. And Hank, I felt so deeply about him. I felt like he was just a victim of his family, a victim of everything. That's all I have to say. I enjoyed it.
How did it speak to your experience, if you wouldn't mind?
Well, actually, I was talking with Kathy about this. We had a seminar a little earlier last month about the Japanese American incarceration. And I have nothing but sacrifice and gratefulness for everything that my parents and all the Japanese Americans went through. I cannot imagine what they put up with. As a Sansei, I would not put up with it at all. And because I broke the mode for the quiet one, because I'm not a otonashi person. And I just really believe that our parents they went through so much, they sacrificed so much, and like you said, they have this feeling of gaman, to just hold it in. And in my eyes, I believe that many of the parents did so much for the future of their own children, so that they can grow up to be what they could not, so that they could have the American dream. But I know as well as everyone that as Sanseis, we face our own discrimination. And so for that reason, that's why I am who I am now. I don't let things go. I am outspoken. Enough for me.
Over here.
My name is Judy. I'm obviously not a Japanese American, but I feel such a kin and such a connection to everything that's been said here because my background is Jewish. And I have experienced in my lifetime many of the experiences that you speak of today. But I made some notes, and I just have a few people that I want to speak to personally. Ben's daughters, you made your father so proud. I know the pain of losing a parent that you have such a connection to, and I want to tell you that I feel with every fiber of my being, your father is here. Your father is loving you. Your father is available to you. I'm so proud, as I am. I wanted to say one other, well, actually 3 other things. One thing about Jews is they don't keep it in. We let it all out. I wanted to say that the act of families not wanting to discuss tragedies in their lives is universal. And my family many of my family members were executed during World War II in the concentration camps, which I completely connect to the internment. And I completely connect to what's happening with ICE today. Imprisonment, taking away one's rights, is a concentration. It's a prison. And you can call it by any name, but many of us have experienced that. But we had someone in our tribe who was a director and a writer, and his name was Steven Spielberg. And he made it his goal in life to not let any survivor from the concentration camps go and pass away without telling their story. And as you may know, he got involved in the Suha project and found every survivor that he could find and recorded their stories. And in that sense, again, our story has been told, whether people want to believe it or not, and there are many people who do not believe that the concentration camps existed. I want to say one other thing, and then I could say a lot of other things, but I'll say one other thing. The whole civil rights movement and the housing legislation, I was privy to see a edict that took place in real estate offices throughout many communities here in Southern California. And the one that I visited was in Pasadena. And in the contract to sell a house in the 50s was you could not sell to a Jew, to a Jap, to a Gypsy, or a colored. We are all part of the same tribe. We've all experienced prejudice and injustice, and I want to let everybody here know that I feel so connected to your story. We all suffer, unfortunately, from the ignorance that exists in our society. That's all.
Hi, my name's Bob. I was friends with Stephen in high school, and I haven't seen, we haven't seen one another in maybe 50 years, but I just wanted to concur with what she just said. I come from a family of Holocaust survivors, so I'm the first American born in the family. Both of my parents were in camps, and it's not lost on me, and it's taken all these years till maybe in the last 5 to 10 years for me to realize that when I went to grade school, I grew up in Mar Vista, north of Venice Boulevard. So there weren't a lot of Asians, Japanese, in my grade school. As soon as I went to junior high school, I went to Daniel Webster Junior High School, which was near Japanese, which is the area which is now Little Tokyo. Been renamed that. So I became friends with a lot of Japanese, I had a lot of Japanese friends, and then when I went to Venice High, the same thing. And it's not lost on me because my parents struggled with being Holocaust survivors, where most of my friends were Japanese, and I think it was unspoken, but we kind of came from families that were stoic and struggled with their past. And we don't talk about with one another until all these years later, like 40, 50 years later. Back then as kids, you're just looking for a good time. As Stephen said, we were all just fragmented and, you know, looking for the next best thing. So I just thought I wanted to add that we're all one, you know, and I had an affinity for it without knowing it about our struggles.
Right here.
Yes, my name is Marvin Inoue, and I'm a volunteer over at Janum in Little Tokyo. But growing up Sansei in the San Gabriel Valley, my dad was one of the few fathers that I realized in recent years that was not a gardener. And he was, I think, in a way, raising me as a way of protecting me from what happened during the World War II years when our family was incarcerated at Santa Anita and Hart Mountain also. And they were trying to protect us from the humiliation that they went through during that time period. And so they wanted me to be all-American. So we pretty much ate American food as much as possible. And I didn't care for, at that time, eating that much Japanese food. However, the racism that you're talking about goes on to this day, just to let you know. After the incarceration period, the United States government didn't want all the incarcerees to go back to the West Coast. A third of them did. Of the third that came back, 40% of them, of the men, became gardeners because they were not allowed to be fishermen anymore, and some of them had lost their farms. This happened in the mid-60s. I have a friend I volunteered with at Pasadena Buddhist Temple. His father's a gardener, and they're gardening in San Marino. And his father says, the owner's over there, go pick up the check. So he goes over and comes back with the check. He says, Dad, this isn't right. We come to this house 2 times a week because it's a huge property. And he says, I know you charge more than this. This is not right. And his father looked at him and said, no, it is right. He says, what do you mean, Dad? It's only $15. He says, I know. But after World War II, and I came back, I needed a job. And this man said he'd hire me under one condition. I never asked for a raise. And so I've never asked for a raise. And this is 20-something years after the war is over, 1960-something. And so he accepted the check and he understood his dad was a man of honor, and he honored that commitment. But he finally got a chance to get even, he said, because this man says, I'm moving to a bigger property in San Marino. I'd like you to be my gardener there. And the guy said, yeah, I'll be your gardener there, but not at that price. So he was able to. So I just wanted to let you know the racism goes on way, not just before World War II, but it took place to this day after World War II.
Right.
And just to let people know, there's people that are here that are Sansei, Niseis, and if there are any Niseis alive, they don't know what took place before World War II. And Rachel Maddow just did a 6-part presentation called Burn Order, which I knew about because I did my own homework, and I tried to let people know. But most Niseis and most Sanseis and most Yonseis don't know about, and Goseis and Rokuseis don't know anything about what happened before World War II. Burn Order is a 6-part episode. Thank you.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the most startling statistics I've seen is that from the end of the war to the mid-60s, 70 to 80% of Nisei men were self-employed. And that means 70 to 80% of Nisei men could not get a job, so they had to create it themselves. So they were just could not get a job. So they had to create their own job, be partners or some service kind of employment or whatever. But I'm hoping to make a point though that, I mean, there are mammoth injustices that our parents had to go through, but I really, wanted to make this statement, which I think Ben's book, I want to go back to Ben's book, which is about us and who we are, and that our parents made sacrifices, but I'm not so sure that this is about, there's a continuancy, that all these Japanese values that persistence and diligence and gaman, really aren't double-sided, that they teach us to tolerate and forgive, and they're not necessarily good for our own psyches. And I feel like I noticed at some point, and I was sort of shocked when I realized it, like my dad was generally had this medium, voice, and often would just be telling us what to do or yelling, and that he had a voice that he never used except when he was on the phone talking, trying to get a reservation or something, and it just turned much higher, and could I make and I was just startled to hear it, and then I would see it sometimes. Once I went to the DMV with him, and that his voice, it was a voice I'd never heard him use around me, and I was hurt to hear it. And then when the DMV person treated him like this nothing, it sort of changed my whole view of him, and as not this person, who victimized me, but a victim himself. But I really, and then one day I realized I was making a reservation, and I raised my voice, and I saw how often I would do it, and then I realized it was in me, and he had given that to me, and this guarding from being victimized, so you try to protect yourself, and I realized I live in what's considered, one of the most liberal places in the world. I live in Berkeley, California. And at some point I realized how often I was adjusting to liberal racism, and people, I was at an event of a book reading with, the most liberal people who always vote correctly and always think correctly, and a guy came up to me and he said, hey, just saw you on TV, and he thought it was this physicist, Michio Kaku, and I said, what do you mean, and he said, aren't you that guy, the scientist? And I said, would you tell would you say to a middle-aged African-American man with a bald head, hey, I really like, I loved your championships with the Chicago Bulls, because, and but this was, and he went, what do you mean? And he was really angry at me. He said, what are you talking about? But this is after I had other people come, and this is after I had been polite, when people came up to me and said, hey, Kent Nagano, hey, and had said, or somebody else, and had said, aren't you this person, aren't you this person? Somebody, aren't you the guy who does the weather on the local channel? And I had been polite enough times, and at some point, after a waiter at a restaurant said, hey, they never mistake me for me. or rarely, unless they're filmmakers. And at some point, I just thought, why am I being nice to these liberal people when they're, these are the people you should talk to first? And I started responding like that, and I found the Michael Jordan thing worked the best. I said, would you say that any middle-aged black men with a bald head, because they would look, because that's what you're doing here, and they would go, no, I'm not, and they were just adamant, and no one ever like went, you're right, and I thought, we do this all the time, and this is like after I was visiting my wife's relatives in Minnesota, and she said, hey, you want to go to a Twins game? And I went, yeah, well, where are the seats? And they had a new stadium, and they were good seats, and I was happy to go. And she said, yeah, my friends will be there, and the friends seemed really nice. And I walked up, the first thing the guy said to me was, hey, some guy, saying, he didn't know the name. He said, there's a Japanese pitcher, and this was the first, he just saw me, and he saw, I wasn't my in-laws' friend, I wasn't anything, I was a Japanese person, I'm just like fed up with it. And this is, and how often do you do this every day, that you're always the outsider, you're always the different person. I'm just, you're not one of everyone. You're not just like everyone else. You're the different person. You're still some version of the Nisei, of the Issei. And so are your so is my Hapa daughter. She hears this, she's hearing the same stuff. And I don't want to pass on these lessons that my parents buried and said was okay and said Gaman about. I mean, yes, Gaman is a great lesson when you got to get through with it, something really difficult. But it's not a great lesson for tolerating a lot of shit that's meant to push you down. And it's not a great lesson, you don't have to stop being the nail that gets pounded down, I feel. And that's, I really felt when Ben was writing this book, that he was, as his friend, I just felt like, and as I was talking to Daisy, I just felt like, yeah, I mean, as hard as it is to do sometimes, it's like nice, white-haired liberal person in Berkeley, who's just gonna go, oh, what, just like, fuck you, I'm tired of it, and I'm sorry, the camp was hard, but, let's tell, Ben was telling the Sansei story. There are lots of other stories, I mean, there are lots of camp stories that haven't been told, but what is the impact of, Eileen, that someone who grows up with parents who were in Tule Lake, and what you grow up in terms of your, not their troubles, but your self-esteem, and your, you growing up feeling not connected to a community that just says, come on. Sometimes you just can't, you don't want to. Maybe you can, but you don't want to.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was wondering if you could speak to Ben's choice of the title, Criminals, a novel. Who are the criminals? Can you speak?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Japanese Americans in general are the criminals. I was taken aback by that choice of titles. The first cover that I saw, that I don't know how many that he was thinking about. One of the first covers was a Maneki Neko, and which I didn't really get. But one of the next couple covers was a picture of the three brothers, and they looked so gnarly in the picture. I thought it would scare people. Didn't you, Zara, Grace? Didn't you think that picture was kind of scary? Like no one would buy the book.
Right. It was like, yeah.
They look like criminals. And then always Venice. I think, well, the palm tree some depiction of Venice was really important. But yeah, I mean, I think it was always that Japanese Americans were criminals, yeah.
I would just like to say I'm Japanese American, but I'm from Hawaii. And so growing up in Hawaii, like we, the Asians in Hawaii, were the majority. So all through my life, I felt I was the majority. So I never felt discriminated against. So now when I'm here, I'm so glad that I'm here because.
So you can be discriminated against?
Because I'm so glad I'm here because now I really understand the Japanese American here on the mainland because their experience is so different. And I don't think that the Japanese Americans in Hawaii, I don't think they really understand what the Japanese Americans here have to deal with. Because when I first came here, my husband was born in one of the camps in Jerome, Arkansas. And so when I first came here, I thought to myself, why are there so many Japanese men? They're gardeners. Because in Hawaii, there are lawyers, doctors, politicians, and like my father was just a salesman who sold life insurance and car insurance. And our doctors were dentists who were Japanese, and the doctors were, most of them were Japanese or Chinese. So it's just a totally different experience. So your perception of things are just so different from the way Japanese and Hawaii perceive things. It is different. So, but now being here, it made me understand really how the Japanese think and how they react. You know, so I'm glad that I'm here. I'm here because my sister-in-law really, spoke, so I wanted to hear what she had to say.
Yeah. Well, when you go to Hawaii, and try to imagine what California would be like if the Japanese Americans hadn't been interned, how much more like a... Yeah, but what would California be like? I mean, how much different would it be if the internment hadn't happened here? It'd be like Hawaii.
I wanted to respond to her comment. I did over 100 hours of interviews with over 100 men in Hawaii, soldiers that created their own Go for Broke, and they have their own house in Honolulu and apartments. And over the 100 hours that I did the interviews, they all said after the war, they all met together in Honolulu and promised each other that they were going to make a fund to create this community of these soldiers and their families, and that they would have an apartment or an income that would perpetuate paying the utilities, bills, etc., and also be able to house any of the soldiers. But what the soldiers did is they went to get their own homes and they rented the apartments out to get income to pay for the property. So the property was paid in cash immediately. During that time when they said they were going to gather, they said they will not be laborers. They will only be the lawyers, the dentists, the doctors, politicians. They will not be second-class citizens. They were very firm on telling me that they were all going to have college education. They will bring up all their brothers to have college education. And some of the dentists brought their brothers in and sent them to colleges and dental schools across the country. It was the most amazing thing, in unison, but each one said it differently, but the same answer came out and in the interview. that they all had decided to do this together, and they all brought their brothers up to be educated in Hawaii. So yes, your brothers in Hawaii are the elite, the politicians, the professionals. They didn't want to be the pool cleaners. They didn't want to be the gardener. They didn't want to be even the farmers. They wanted to be the professionals. And that's why I wanted to address that.
Well, for me, I just, just the, whatever you are, I mean, when I go to Hawaii and you're among locals in a local business, to me it's like a vacation from the mainland. You walk into a business and people treat you like you belong there. There's this immediate sense of you belong there, and we feel it just, you just know it and you can feel it. And it's like it ought to be here.
So, Stephen, I had an opportunity to do some charrettes in the community as we were putting together the Go for Broke National Education Center exhibit in downtown LA. And one of the ones we had was with Professor Don Hatta in Dominguez Hills. And he stood up at the beginning of the charrette and he goes, "I want to say that all the Nisei are mentally ill." And it just shocked the entire room. We go, what is he talking about? But as we thought more about it, talking about what you were talking about, this generational trauma, I think as I continue to reflect on it, it really kind of struck home to me. And as I was looking at different things in my own life and different things evidentially, I sort of looked at something like, when you look at the film Farewell to Manzanar, remember the part where the grandfather essentially just goes berserk? And because of the sheer frustration and the trauma and there's just all the situation that he's been facing, I think that's what Don Hatta was talking about in terms of the Nisei, in terms of what they had to endure and what their mental state was coming out. And then I look back to myself and I say, well, how does that reflect on me going forward? And what you said in terms of your father's voice, I remember that in my father too. He was the most mild-mannered person. But he pushed him to the wall in terms of like degraded him to a point where he never felt heard. I heard his voice go up. I heard that anger inside of him go up. And I kind of reflect on myself too at times where I have been demeaned to a point where I boil over. And I, like him, have these points where I hear my voice raised from just sheer anger of injustice. And so it's something that I have struggled with now since that Don Hatta comment. I keep looking at going, how true is that comment, and how much is it in this generation of trauma? It still gets reflected to me, my son, and it's a perplexing thing, but I think it's something that I think is still out there, and it's still something we have not come to terms with. And I don't think we've really fully investigated to say this is really the impact it's had on our community for the long, long haul, and it's very difficult. I reflect back to even some of my friends. I play in the Southern California Nisei Golf Association group, which was started by the Niseis, and they were started because they couldn't get tee times up. They would phone in and say, "Hey, it's John Ishikawa trying to get tee," and they would say, "Oh, sorry, no tee times." And so they banded together 3,000 of them and decided to start doing tournaments at different golf courses. And by taking 150 players, they were able to get tee times. But I reflect on the fact that I play with a number of Sanseis now because it's no Donald generation. And we talk about the fact that there are times, actually when we're playing, and if we get hit into by somebody behind us, we're okay one time. We might be okay a second time. And then I've actually seen it firsthand. My friends have actually just gone haywire. It's just like they snap and they go, "What the f are you guys doing?" And they go turn around on the golf course and go back to confront those guys. And I'm going like, whoa, where's this coming from? Because these are my mild-mannered friends. But they've gotten hit into 3 times now, and they've snapped to the point where we're like, okay, this is something a lot bigger than just a golf ball being into us. And it's built in. It's something we live with and something we have to cope with. And it's a difficult concept. It's a difficult concept to explain to your children, to say, because I've seen my son at times where there's a big injustice, he gets unjustly probably animated about it. And I'm trying to say, hold on, wait a minute, this is probably not the best thing. And how have I influenced him to have that same kind of response to this? It's a very difficult thing to come to terms with. But I totally understand what you're saying in terms of generational trauma. It's there and it's real.
Thanks a lot. No, I really appreciate that. I think, I don't, I think that,
Can I just make one comment?
yes, please.
Which is that I do agree that we have, Sansei do have trauma from camps, and a lot has to be, worked out as evidence here. Not a lot of people spoke, so more people need to talk about that. But I do want to say that, when the Nisei spoke at the commission hearings, and they talked about what they had gone through in the incarceration, it was a really big thing for us. It had a big impact on the Sansei, and it helped us understand what they had gone through. And I think fighting for reparations was also cathartic for us in terms of understanding more about what they went through, and maybe even looking at ourselves too. Although I agree there's a lot more that we have to deal with, but I think there's two parts to this. We didn't, before redress and during redress and after. It's like before redress we didn't have anything, and it was really difficult before these American studies. And then after that, I think it kind of changed many of us, and I hope it continues to change more of our community as we really look at that period of time. We should be proud of what we did, and I think that makes us go stronger.
Yeah. Yes.
Very, very.
Well, Daisy's been looking at some of the commission hearing. It's really been fascinating for me, and I've been really knocked out by the sort of raw power of the testimonies when they first came out and stuff, and really appreciative of being able to, that she's shared some of that with me, and I think that's absolutely true, and that really started the opening up, but I want to, just end by saying, I think, when we were growing up, I think there were, there's always the double side, and I think, the communities can, and the Japanese side can be oppressive, but I think, I don't want to say there's not power in the community, but, clearly now, the communities need to, open up, and I really would like, we have this camp story, I think, needs to move up and to elevate, so it really speaks to us, not as this thing that we keep referring to in the past, but like, how is it alive in us? How does it really, and I think also, what, the community really lives by, this openness to, and accepting the individual. I think it's really hard to be an individual in the community, and and the best way, the communities really survive, and as everyone's dispersed, is a lot of openness and accepting individuality of all sorts, and me being able to be up here. I think and Ben, sort of cracking this open for me, and being the impetus for having everybody here is just, amazing, and I'm so grateful to Diane for getting my credit card and starting this thing, and for all of you coming out and supporting this, and for Zara and Grace to come out and and give it this, and for Pat to be here to talk, and and for Daisy and Mark and Shirley to add to it, and yes.
I just wanted to make one comment with the, that I recently saw a film by a Filipino filmmaker, Marlon Fuentes, and he's very interested in his past, which is colonization of the Philippines. And his reason is, he says, unless you don't know your past, you don't know where you're going. And I think Ben's book really helped me to understand the past. But I think the real power of his book is to understand where we're going. And in this era of Jim Crow 2.0, it tells us where to go and what to do.
Thank you all.
Somebody left a cane. Oh, back here. A cane is not a credit card, but still very important. Thank you to all of our readers, Daisy, Shirley, and Mark. Thank you to all our community and corporate sponsors and personal sponsors and donors. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you to Ben's children, Akira, who couldn't join us today, but Grace and Zara, thank you for sharing your dad with us today. And thank you to Stephen and Ben. You gave us this chance to meet and reflect and hold on to each other before it's too late. Gail is going to be circulating around collecting your evaluation forms, and it's critical because we can't go forward unless we show what a wonderful experience today was. Everyone in this room is so very special. Let's continue to share refreshments and memories today and hopefully many, many tomorrows. 2 books left. 2 books left. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.